Corruption is often spoken about as if it is a financial crime, an issue of greed, paperwork, or dishonest politicians stealing money. People condemn it, but many still treat it as something less serious than violence. When people think of violence, they imagine guns, wars, riots, or physical assault. Corruption, by contrast, appears almost invisible. A politician signs a fraudulent contract, a minister diverts funds, an official demands a bribe. It seems administrative rather than brutal. Yet, in many African countries, corruption is one of the most violent acts committed against civilians because its consequences are measured not only in money lost, but in human lives destroyed. The violence of corruption lies in the fact that it quietly denies people the conditions necessary to live. It kills slowly, indirectly, and often anonymously. A child dies in a hospital without medicine because funds meant for healthcare were stolen. A bridge collapses because corrupt contractors used weak materials after bribing inspectors. Communities remain trapped in poverty because development money disappears into private bank accounts. Unlike conventional violence, corruption does not always leave visible blood on the floor. Instead, it leaves collapsing schools, broken hospitals, starvation, disease, unemployment, and hopelessness. The victims are rarely counted in the same way victims of war are counted, but they exist in massive numbers across the African continent. In Africa, corruption is especially destructive because many countries are still dealing with the long-term effects of colonial exploitation, economic inequality, weak institutions, and fragile public services. In these conditions, every stolen public resource matters even more. When a wealthy country loses millions through corruption, its systems may still function, but when corruption takes place in a poorer or developing African state, the damage becomes catastrophic because governments often already struggle to provide basic services. If corruption in South Africa needed a face, I would point to Edwin Sodi. If corruption in South Africa was a sport and we needed a mascot, I would nominate Edwin Sodi. And not because he's the most corrupt man in South Africa, no, I can't say that for sure, but because he has proven over and over again that he doesn't want to finish the projects that the government keeps giving him, but the government rewards him with more nonetheless. While I was researching for this video, I came across an investigative report by Bungane, which I highly recommend you go read. It comes in two parts and it is titled Deadly Water, The Life and Death of Tenderpreneur. This investigative piece, explores the failed Rooiwal wastewater treatment project and its potential link to a catastrophic cholera outbreak that caused dozens of deaths. The investigative piece focuses on the volatile relationship, or rather partnership, between prolific tenderpreneur Edwin Sodi and the late Rudolph Schoeman Jr., whose company CMS Water Engineering allegedly left a trail of mismanagement across South Africa. Despite securing a 291 million rand contract through irregular bidding processes, the joint venture collapsed amidst allegations of theft, bribery, and fraud. The investigation highlights how political connections and corporate negligence led to untreated sewage contaminating local water sources. Corruption also destroys education systems, and this too is a form of violence. Transparency International has shown that corruption in education across African countries denies millions of children access to quality schooling and deepens poverty and inequality. When school funds are stolen, classrooms remain unfinished, teachers go unpaid, and students are forced to learn without books or proper facilities. The result is not only poor education, but the destruction of future future opportunities. A child denied education because of corruption is more likely to remain trapped in poverty, unemployment, and social instability. Corruption steals futures long before it steals money. And what makes corruption particularly dangerous is that it normalizes suffering. In many African countries, bribery has become so common that people often treat it as part of daily life. Citizens may pay bribes to access healthcare, receive police assistance, obtain documents, or even secure employment. Imagine having to pay for employment. Imagine that. That is someone's reality. There's a group of people who have the jobs that they have today because they had to pay bribes. Imagine that. Over time, corruption becomes embedded into society so deeply that people stop recognizing its violence. Another reason corruption is violent is because it destroys trust between citizens and the state. Governments exist partly to protect citizens and provide public goods and services, but when leaders steal public resources, citizens begin to lose faith in institutions. Hospitals, schools, police forces, and courts stop being seen as protectors and instead become systems people fear or distrust. This breakdown of trust weakens democracy itself. Citizens may stop voting, disengage from public life, or turn towards unrest and extremism because they no longer believe peaceful systems can improve their lives. In Africa, corruption is also connected to global systems of exploitation. Many African countries lose billions through illicit financial flows, exploitative multinational practices, and partnership between corrupt local elites and international corporations. Some critics argue that corruption in Africa cannot be understood purely as an African problem because global economic systems often enable the extraction of African wealth. This creates a cycle where ordinary civilians suffer twice, first from local corruption and second from international systems that profit from weak governance and exploitation. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but I truly hold the belief that one of the things that contribute to Africa's underdeveloped state right now is the fact that it was held back in terms of development opportunities in the early centuries. And someone who talks about this is Walter Rooney in his 1971 book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. And he says, I quote, "It must be borne in mind that to be held back at one stage means that it is impossible to go on to a further stage. When a person is forced to leave school after only 2 years of primary school education, it is no reflection on him that he is academically and intellectually less developed than someone who has had the opportunity to be schooled right through to university level. What Africa experienced in early centuries of trade was precisely a loss of development opportunity, and this is of great importance." In Nigeria, corruption in public healthcare provides another example of how corruption becomes deadly violence. Despite being one of Africa's largest economies and oil producers, millions of Nigerians still lack access to proper healthcare, clean water, and medicine. A major reason is the diversion and theft of public funds meant for development. The consequences are devastating. Many Nigerians die from preventable illnesses because clinics lack equipment, doctors are underpaid, and medicine is unavailable. Maternal mortality rates remain among the highest in the world. In rural communities especially, corruption means people must either pay bribes for treatment or go without care entirely. And this is the story that made me want to include Nigeria in this conversation. So, following the tragic death of celebrated author Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's young son, Nigeria is facing a national reckoning over medical negligence. This high-profile loss, alongside several other harrowing cases of surgical errors and clinical mismanagement, has exposed deep-seated failures within both public and private healthcare sectors. Experts attribute this frequent preventable mistakes to a severe shortage of doctors, chronic government underfunding, and the brain dead of medical professionals moving abroad. In response to the mounting public outcry, the Nigerian government has established a national task force dedicated to improving patient safety and clinical governance. While this initiative aims to restore accountability and trust, many citizens remain skeptical that administrative changes can fix a systematic crisis rooted in overstretched resources. This is a powerful example of corruption as violence because civilians are harmed not by bullets but by negligence created through greed. The people responsible may never physically attack anyone, yet their actions contribute directly to suffering and death on a massive scale. The tragedy is that corruption rarely creates immediate public outrage in the same way terrorism or war does. A bomb explosion shocks the world because the violence is visible and dramatic. Corruption, however, kills slowly and quietly. A hospital without medicine does not make headlines every day. A child dying from preventable death because healthcare funds were stolen may never appear on television, but the accumulative destruction caused by corruption can exceed the damage of an armed conflict. Corruption shortens lives, deepens hunger, destroys dignity, and weakens entire societies over generations. Ultimately, corruption should not be understood merely as bad governance or financial misconduct. It is violence in institutional form. It may not always involve weapons, but it attacks the foundations of human survival. In the African context, where millions rely heavily on public systems for healthcare, education, housing, and employment, corruption becomes especially cruel because it targets people who are already vulnerable. The corrupt official who steals public money may never physically meet the people harmed by their actions, but the suffering they create is real nonetheless. To fight corruption, therefore, is not only an economic or political struggle, it is a moral and humanitarian one. Combating corruption means protecting civilians from avoidable suffering and death. It means recognizing that violence is not only what happens on the battlefields, but also what happens when greed destroys the systems people depend on to live. Africa's struggle against corruption is, in many ways, a struggle for dignity, survival, and justice itself. If you got to the end of the video, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Please leave a like, a comment, subscribe as well, and share, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.